It was one of those nights that felt heavier than usual. The air was cool, the streets were almost empty, and the soft hum of streetlights flickered above the quiet road. A man was driving home after finishing his late shift. The city was calm, but he was tired. The kind of tired that comes not just from work, but from the long, endless weight of life itself. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel as a slow song played from the car radio. The tune made him think of his mother, of childhood evenings when life seemed simple. He smiled faintly at the memory, the smell of her cooking, the way she used to hum that same song while doing dishes. He missed those days. He worked hard, harder than most people noticed. The job wasn't glamorous, long hours, little pay, but it kept him going. He wasn't rich, but he was proud of what he had built for himself. That night, like every other, he just wanted to reach home, take a warm shower, and rest before starting another day. As he drove, the roads grew emptier. A soft mist began to form on the windshield, and he wiped it away with his sleeve. The traffic lights glowed red, yellow, then green, the rhythm of the city pulsing quietly in the dark. Then, from behind, came a flash of bright light, blue and red. He frowned and glanced in the rearview mirror. A police car. The flashing lights painted the inside of his car in harsh color. Red, blue, red again. He felt his chest tighten. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't breaking any law. Still, his stomach sank, a cold unease spreading through him. He pulled over to the side of the road, rolling down the window halfway. The air outside felt colder now. He could hear the sound of his own heartbeat as the police car stopped behind him. Two figures stepped out, officers, one on each side. The man took a slow breath and whispered to himself, "Stay calm." He placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel, something he had taught himself to always do. It wasn't fear exactly, but caution born from experience. He had heard stories, seen news clips, situations that went wrong even when the person did everything right. So he stayed still and waited. The first officer approached the driver's side. His face was partly hidden under the shadow of his hat. His tone was sharp when he spoke. "License and registration?" The man nodded politely, reaching slowly for his wallet. "Yes, sir. It's right here." Slowly, the officer repeated, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Yes, sir," the man said again, keeping his movements deliberate, careful, respectful. He handed over his license and registration, then waited. The officer glanced at the documents, his expression unreadable. "Where are you coming from?" "Work," the man replied. "I just finished my shift. I'm heading home." The officer leaned a little closer, scanning the interior of the car. "What kind of work?" "I deliver supplies for a store," the man answered. "Uh-huh." The officer's tone carried a hint of disbelief. "Out this late?" "Yes, sir. Sometimes I get off late. Depends on the deliveries." The second officer had walked around to the passenger side now, shining a flashlight inside the car. The bright beam swept across the seats, the dashboard, the floor, searching, inspecting. "Got anyone else in the car?" The second officer asked. "No, sir. Just me." They didn't reply right away. The man could feel the tension building even though he had done nothing wrong. His mouth felt dry. He tried to steady his breathing, focusing on the rhythm of his heart. The first officer stepped back, talking quietly to his partner near the patrol car. The man couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see their silhouettes under the flashing lights. He felt trapped in that moment, between fear and confusion. After a few seconds, the first officer came back. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. The man hesitated. "Is something wrong, officer?" "Just step out," the officer said more firmly. The man nodded and slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He opened the door, stepping into the cool night air. The street was silent except for the faint hum of the patrol car's engine and the steady pulse of the lights. He stood there beside his car, hands visible, trying to stay calm. "Can I ask what this is about?" The officer looked him over, eyes narrowing slightly. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he said. The man's stomach dropped. "Description?" "Yeah. Dark clothing, driving a car like this one. But this is my work uniform," he said quietly. "And I've had this car for years." The officer gave a small shrug. "Then it shouldn't be a problem to check, right?" The man nodded, forcing a small, nervous smile. "Of course, sir." He watched as the officer began to radio in his license number. The other officer stood nearby, his flashlight still scanning the car. The beam lingered on the back seat, on the small lunchbox, on the delivery receipts lying on the passenger seat. Every second felt longer than the last. The man could hear the static of the radio, the low voices from the other end. He thought about his family, his home, the quiet street he lived on. He thought about how he should already be there by now, maybe sitting on the couch watching a late-night show, his shoes kicked off. Then the first officer returned. "Everything looks fine," he said. But his tone didn't sound relieved, more suspicious than before. The man exhaled slightly, relieved it was almost over. "Thank you, officer. Can I go now?" The officer's eyes narrowed again. "Hold on. You seem nervous." The man blinked. "Nervous? It's just, well, it's late and this situation—" "Step back," the officer interrupted. He obeyed, stepping back from the car. The second officer moved closer, shining the flashlight toward his face now. The beam stung his eyes and he turned slightly to avoid it. "Keep looking straight," the officer said. He did. His heartbeat picked up again. He wished someone else was there to see what was happening. The empty street felt endless, the silence heavy. "I'm not hiding anything," he said quietly. Neither officer responded. They moved around the car again, checking the trunk, the doors, even peering beneath. The man stood helplessly on the side of the road, trying to stay composed. A passing car slowed for a moment, then drove off. He wished it had stopped. He wished someone had asked if he was okay. Finally, after what felt like forever, the officer walked back toward him. "Nothing illegal here," he muttered. The man tried to smile, hoping this would be the end of it. "So I can leave now?" The officer looked at him again, a long stare that felt personal. Not about the car, not about the license, but something deeper. Then he said, "Next time, make sure you don't give anyone a reason to stop you." The man wanted to ask what that even meant, but he bit his tongue. "Yes, sir," he said softly. The officers walked back to their patrol car. The flashing lights finally dimmed and silence returned to the street. The man stood there for a few seconds, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. He got back into his car, closing the door gently. The silence inside felt heavy. He sat there, hands resting on the wheel again, staring at the road ahead. He didn't start the car right away. He just breathed. Slowly, deeply. The adrenaline still rushed through him, but there was also a deep sadness, the kind that didn't come from anger, but from exhaustion. He had done everything right. He had been polite, patient, calm, but he still felt powerless. When he finally started the car, the radio song had ended. A new one played. A slow, quiet tune, the kind that carried a mix of melancholy and hope. He turned it down, preferring the silence. As he drove off, he noticed his reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, a tense jaw. He told himself to forget it, to move on, but deep down he knew it would stay with him. A few miles later, he pulled into a gas station, needing a break. The clerk greeted him kindly, asked if he wanted a coffee. He nodded. The warmth of the cup in his hands helped steady him. He stood by the window, looking out at the streetlights. The world seemed peaceful again, as if nothing had happened. Cars drove by, people laughed in the distance. Everything looked normal. But inside, something had shifted. He didn't know if it was fear, frustration, or just fatigue, but he felt different. The kind of different that comes from realizing how fragile dignity can be, how quickly trust can break. He finished his coffee and thanked the clerk. The man smiled, unaware of what had just happened to him. Driving home, he thought about his family, his friends, and the stories he had heard from others, stories that sounded like distant echoes until they became his own. The city lights grew dimmer as he reached his neighborhood. His small apartment waited quietly at the end of the street, its porch light glowing faintly. He parked the car and sat there for a moment, not ready to go inside yet. The world outside was still, the night air soft. He looked up at the sky, a few faint stars, a sliver of moon. He whispered to himself, "You made it home. That's what matters." But deep down he knew it wasn't just about making it home. It was about being seen, being understood, being treated as human. He walked inside, turned on the light, and sank into the old couch. The clock on the wall ticked softly. He closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come right away. His mind replayed every word, every glance, every moment of silence between the flashing lights. Eventually, exhaustion took over. and he drifted into a restless sleep. Outside, the city kept breathing, unaware of the quiet storm that had passed on one of its empty streets. It was a night that looked ordinary from the outside. But for him, it was a night that would not be forgotten. A night that began like any other but carried something deeper. The weight of being questioned for simply existing, and the quiet courage of staying calm in the face of uncertainty. He didn't know it yet, but this night, this single encounter, would set in motion a chain of events that would change more than just his life. It would soon bring people, power, and truth together in ways no one could have expected. And though he couldn't see it yet, somewhere not too far away, destiny was already moving, quietly, steadily, toward that moment when everything would shift once more. The next morning arrived quietly. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, brushing softly across the small room. The man woke slowly, his body still heavy from the long night before. For a moment he just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what day it was. Then it all came back. The flashing lights, the voices, the chill in the air. He sat up slowly and rubbed his eyes. His chest still felt tight, like he had been holding his breath all night. He got out of bed, shuffled to the small kitchen, and started a pot of coffee. The smell filled the air, warm and familiar. It grounded him a little. He sat down at the table and stared at his phone. No messages. He opened it anyway, scrolling through the news, the weather, a few random videos. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every time he saw a police car in a photo or clip, his stomach turned. He took a sip of coffee and looked out the window. The street outside was calm. Kids were walking to school. Someone was walking their dog. The mailman was making his rounds. Life was moving as if nothing had happened, but inside he was still caught in that moment. He tried to brush it off. It's over, he told himself. You're fine. Just move on. He dressed for work, same dark jacket, same shoes, and grabbed his keys. He hesitated before locking the door, wondering if he really wanted to go out again. But rent wasn't going to pay itself, so he forced himself to leave. The drive to work felt longer than usual. Every car that slowed near him made him tense. Every time he saw police lights in the distance, he gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. He hated feeling that way, afraid of something that was supposed to protect him. When he finally reached work, his boss greeted him with the same tired smile. "Morning," the boss said. "Morning," he replied. "You look tired," his boss said. "Long night?" "Yeah, something like that," he said quietly. He didn't explain. He didn't want to. He knew how the conversation would go, polite nods, maybe a quiet, "That's rough," and then back to business. Some things were easier left unsaid. He spent the morning loading boxes, checking lists, and making deliveries. The routine helped. Moving, lifting, driving. It gave him something else to focus on. Still, the thought lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake. At one of his delivery stops, an older woman at the counter smiled at him. "You look like you've had a hard night," she said kindly. He chuckled softly. "Yeah, you could say that." "Well, I hope your day gets better," she said, handing him a receipt. Her simple kindness caught him off guard. "Thank you," he said sincerely. It reminded him that the world wasn't all bad, that even after something unfair, there were still good people. Still small moments of warmth that kept you going. By late afternoon, he felt a little lighter. The sun was warm on his face as he loaded the last few boxes into the truck. Maybe tonight would be better, he thought. Maybe he'd finally sleep peacefully. But as he turned onto the main road to head back to the store, his heart sank. There they were again. 2 police cars, parked at the side of the road, lights flashing faintly. Different officers this time, but the same feeling hit him instantly. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. His breath quickened. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but his body reacted anyway. He slowed down, careful not to make any sudden moves. His pulse was loud in his ears. The police cars didn't move. They weren't even looking at him. But he still felt their presence like a weight pressing on his chest. He kept driving. Slowly. Quietly. Only when he turned the next corner did he exhale. That night, when he got home, he didn't turn on the TV. He just sat in the dark for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the city. It was strange how something that had lasted only a few minutes could stay with you so long. He decided to call his brother. He hadn't planned to, but he needed to talk to someone who would understand. When his brother answered, the man tried to sound normal. "Hey, what's up?" "Not much," his brother replied. "You sound tired." "Yeah, something happened last night. What kind of something?" He told him, not every detail but enough. The stop, the questions, the way they made him feel small for no reason. His brother was silent for a few seconds, then said softly, "I'm sorry that happened." "It's not right." "I know," he said. "But what can I do?" "I didn't even get their names. I just wanted to go home." "That's all any of us want," his brother said, "to get home safe." The silence that followed said more than words could. "You did the right thing by staying calm," his brother added. "That's what matters." "Yeah," he said. "I guess." They talked a little longer about family, work, small things, and then hung up. But the words kept echoing in his head. "You did the right thing." He wanted to believe that. Days passed, but the feeling didn't go away. He noticed things he hadn't before. How people looked at him when he walked into certain stores, how security guards seemed to follow him with their eyes. Maybe it had always been like that and he just hadn't paid attention. One afternoon, while stopping for gas, he saw one of the same officers from that night parked across the street. Their eyes met briefly through the glass. The officer looked away first, but it sent a chill down the man's spine. He tried to ignore it, finished pumping gas, paid inside, and drove off. But his mind kept spinning. What if they remember me? What if they think I did something? That night he wrote about it in a small notebook he kept by his bed, something he hadn't done in years. Just a few lines. "I was stopped again last week. Nothing happened, but it felt like it could have. I don't want to be afraid, but I am. I just want peace." Writing it down helped, even if just a little. A week later, something unexpected happened. When he came home from work one evening, a neighbor waved him over. "Hey," the neighbor said. "You were out late the other night, right? On Maple Street?" "Yeah," he replied cautiously. "I think someone filmed that. It's been going around online. A short clip of police stopping someone. I couldn't see clearly, but I think it might have been you." His heart jumped. "Filmed where?" "Social media," the neighbor said. "It's getting shared around. People are talking about how unfair it looked." He didn't know what to say. Part of him was curious. Part of him was terrified. Later that night he searched for it, and there it was. A shaky video taken from across the street. The clip was only a minute long, but it showed everything. The flashing lights, the way the officer leaned too close, the tension in the man's body as he stood with his hands visible. It wasn't violent. Nothing extreme, but it was powerful, because you could feel the fear and unfairness even in silence. Comments poured in below the video. Some people were angry, others supportive. "This isn't right. He did nothing wrong. Why does this keep happening?" He scrolled through them slowly, not sure how to feel. He hadn't wanted attention. He hadn't even told anyone besides his brother. Now strangers were talking about him, even if they didn't know his name. The next morning, his phone buzzed with messages from coworkers. "Hey, is that you in that video?" one asked. Another said, "You handled that so calmly, man, respect." He didn't reply right away. He just stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. By the end of the day, the video had spread even more. Local news outlets picked it up, discussing it in soft tones, words like unnecessary, questionable behavior, and community concern. He watched it once on TV and then turned it off. It felt strange seeing his quiet, painful moment turned into something public, but deep down a small part of him felt relief. At least people saw what happened. At least someone noticed. The next few days were a blur. Reporters started calling the store where he worked, asking for interviews. He declined. He didn't want fame or pity, he just wanted fairness. Then something else happened. One evening, as he left work, a woman approached him in the parking lot. She was neatly dressed, confident but kind in her manner. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you the man from the video?" He hesitated. "I think so." "I'm with the district attorney's office," she said, showing her ID. "We've been reviewing some of the recent incidents in this area. I wanted to talk to you, and if you're comfortable." Her tone was calm, not demanding, respectful. He nodded slowly. "Sure, I didn't think anyone would care." "We do," she said softly. "You deserve to be heard." They sat down at a nearby cafe. She asked gentle questions, not pushing, just listening. He told her what happened that night, every detail he remembered, The stop, the questions, the flashlight, the way he felt trapped. When he finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "I believe you," she said. Those words hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear them. She thanked him for his time and gave him her card. "We're looking into this," she said. "You might not see results right away, but don't lose faith. Change takes time, but it begins with moments like this." He nodded again, quietly grateful. As she left, he sat for a while longer, watching people walk by. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't all for nothing. Maybe something good could come from it. He went home that night and looked at the notebook again. He turned to a new page and wrote, "Someone listened today. Maybe things can get better." He smiled faintly, closed the notebook, and looked out the window. The city lights twinkled softly in the distance like small promises waiting to be fulfilled. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since that night, he didn't feel alone. The fear was still there, yes, but so was something else. Something stronger. Hope. And though he couldn't see it yet, that small spark would soon grow brighter, because somewhere out there people were starting to pay attention. Days passed quietly after the meeting with the woman from the district attorney's office. The man went back to work, trying to keep his head down and focus on everyday life. But inside he felt something changing. For weeks he had carried fear and anger like heavy stones inside him. Now there was still weight, but also something new. It felt like movement, like maybe his voice had finally reached someone willing to listen. He didn't tell many people about the meeting. Only his brother knew. The rest of the world went on. But things around him were shifting in small ways. Sometimes strangers recognized him from the video. They would stop him at the gas station or the store, offering quiet words of support. "Hey, I saw what happened to you," one man said once. "You handled it with strength, respect." He would nod and thank them, but deep down he still didn't know what to say. He hadn't done anything special. He had just tried to survive a moment that could have gone wrong. A week later, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was from the same woman he had spoken to. "Hello, this is from the DA's office. Would you be available to meet again? We'd like to discuss a few things." He hesitated for a while before replying. "Yes, I can. When?" She responded almost immediately. "Tomorrow morning, if possible." At our downtown office that night he barely slept. Thoughts ran through his mind like a movie on repeat. What if this was bad news? What if they changed their mind? What if nothing would come of it? He woke early, dressed neatly, and took the bus downtown. The ride felt long, filled with the quiet chatter of strangers and the hum of the city outside. When he reached the tall glass building, he took a deep breath before stepping inside. The receptionist greeted him politely and led him to a waiting room. The walls were white, the air smelled faintly of coffee. A few minutes later, the woman from before appeared. Her smile was calm and reassuring. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Come with me." She led him into a small conference room. There were two other people there. One was another investigator and the other was a community representative. They introduced themselves and asked if he was comfortable talking again. "Yes," he said. His voice was quiet but steady. They asked him to walk them through the night once more, step by step. He told the story carefully. The flashing lights, the way the officers spoke, the cold tone in their voices, the fear that settled into his chest. He didn't exaggerate anything. He didn't need to. The truth was enough. When he finished, the woman nodded. "We've spoken with several witnesses who were nearby that night," she said. "Their accounts match yours. We've also reviewed additional video footage." He looked at her, unsure what to expect next. She continued gently. "We're opening a formal review of the officers involved." He blinked, unsure if he heard her right. "A review?" "Yes," she said. "It means an official investigation will take place. It's the first step, but it's an important one." For a moment, he just sat there in silence. He wasn't sure how to feel. Relief mixed with disbelief. Someone was actually doing something. "Thank you," he said finally. "I didn't think anyone would care." The woman smiled softly. "People care. Sometimes it just takes a spark to remind them." She gave him a folder with some information about the process, what would happen next, how long it might take, and who would contact him if they needed anything further. Before he left, she said, "Whatever happens, you did the right thing by speaking up. It's never easy to tell the truth when it's painful." As he walked out of the building, the morning sunlight hit his face. It felt warmer than usual. He stood there for a while, breathing it in. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Over the next few weeks, the investigation quietly gained attention. Local news channels began covering it more closely. Reporters stood outside the police department asking questions that for once couldn't be ignored. The man didn't give interviews, he didn't want fame, but people were talking and that mattered. At work, his coworkers treated him differently now. Not with pity, but with respect. One of them said, "You gave a lot of people hope, man." "That took guts," he shook his head. "I just told the truth." "Yeah," the coworker replied. "And that's the hardest thing sometimes." The man kept working day after day, but inside he felt a quiet strength growing. He still had bad dreams sometimes, flashes of red and blue, the sound of a voice demanding he step out of his car, but he also had purpose now. A few evenings later, as he was closing up at work, his phone rang again. It was the woman from the DA's office. Her tone was calm but serious. "Something's happening tonight," she said. "There's going to be a press statement from the department. I wanted to let you know before it airs." "Okay," he said, his voice cautious. "Should I watch it?" "If you feel ready," she replied. "No pressure. Just know that progress is being made." That night he sat on his couch, the TV remote in hand. The news anchor appeared standing in front of a police headquarters building. Behind her, microphones and cameras surrounded the podium. The police chief spoke carefully. "After reviewing recent footage and conducting an internal investigation, we have decided to place 2 officers on administrative leave pending further review of their conduct during a recent traffic stop." The man's heart pounded. It was them. The same 2 from that night. He leaned forward, hardly breathing. The chief continued, "We are committed to transparency and fairness. We understand that trust must be rebuilt, and we will work to ensure that every citizen feels safe in this community." The man turned off the TV and sat quietly. He didn't know what justice would look like yet, but for the first time it felt possible. The next morning, when he stepped outside, his neighbor called from across the street. "Hey, I saw the news. About time someone said something, huh?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, feels like maybe things are changing." "Keep your head up," the neighbor said. "You did good." As the days passed, the community began to speak out more. Local groups held meetings about fairness and accountability. People shared their own stories, some painful, some hopeful. The man attended one of those meetings quietly, sitting in the back. He listened as people spoke about fear, dignity, and the importance of respect. When the meeting ended, someone recognized him and invited him to speak. At first, he wanted to say no, but then he stood up. His voice trembled a little, but it was steady enough. "I'm not here to talk about anger," he said. "I'm here to talk about hope. Because sometimes when something bad happens, it opens a door. People start to listen. That's what matters." The crowd applauded softly, not out of excitement but appreciation. After that, things changed again. The woman from the DA's office invited him to a community roundtable, a meeting between citizens and local officials. When he arrived, the room was filled with reporters, community leaders, and even police representatives. He sat quietly until it was his turn to speak. When he did, his words were simple. "All I ever wanted was to be treated with respect. Not special treatment, just fairness. I think that's what everyone here wants." His honesty cut through the room. People nodded. Some even teared up. One of the police representatives, an older officer, stood and spoke after him. "You're right," the officer said. "And I want to say I'm sorry for the way things have been. We need to do better. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was a beginning." Over the next few months, new programs were started. Community discussions, training sessions for officers, and open town halls. The man didn't take credit for any of it, but he knew his story had played a part. He still worked his same job, still lived in the same small apartment, but people treated him differently now. Not as a victim, but as someone who had stood up quietly and reminded everyone of something important: kindness, fairness, and humanity. One afternoon, he ran into the woman from the DA's office again. They met outside the courthouse, the sun bright above them. She smiled warmly. "You look lighter," she said. "I guess I am," he replied. "Things feel different now." "You helped make that happen," she said. "Don't forget that." He nodded, humbled. "I didn't do it alone." "No one ever does," she said. "But it takes one person to start it." He thanked her and walked away, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He was just a man who had faced something unfair and decided not to stay silent about it. That night, as he sat by his window, the city lights flickered in the distance. He thought about how far things had come since that quiet night on the empty road. He still remembered the fear, but now, that memory carried something else too. A sense of strength. Sometimes he still heard the faint echo of that first moment, the flashing lights, the cold air, but it no longer defined him. It had become part of his story, not the end of it. He picked up his notebook again, the same one he had written in before. On a clean page he wrote, "Change doesn't come all at once. It comes in small steps, a voice, a choice, a moment of courage. I didn't plan to start anything. I just wanted peace. But maybe peace begins with honesty." He put the pen down and smiled. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars passed, people talked, life went on. Somewhere downtown, meetings were still happening. New policies were being written. Conversations were continuing. And though he was just one person among many, he knew his truth had mattered. He looked up at the sky. It was clear that night, filled with stars. He thought about how small each one looked, yet how bright they could be when they worked together. He whispered softly, "Maybe that's what hope looks like." And in that quiet, peaceful moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Not just from fear, but from silence. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he was ready for it. Ready to live, to speak, and to believe again. The story that had begun with flashing lights on an empty road had turned into something far bigger than him. It had become a story of truth, of change, and of what can happen when one person refuses to let fear be the final word. And somewhere out there, others were watching, listening, learning, and preparing to add their own voices to the quiet, steady rhythm of hope that was beginning to rise. The months that followed brought quiet change. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was real. The man began to notice small differences in the world around him. People smiled at him more. Strangers nodded in acknowledgement when they passed him on the street. Even at work, things felt lighter. The same co-workers who once kept their distance now talked to him during lunch, asking about his day, sharing stories, laughing. He didn't think of himself as anyone special. But somehow his story had spread further than he expected. One morning, a co-worker showed him a short article online. It was about community healing after injustice. His name wasn't mentioned, but the story sounded very familiar. He smiled quietly. Maybe that was better. It wasn't about him alone. It was about what people could do together. The days started to blend into a rhythm. Work, home, the occasional meeting at the community center. But something deep inside him was shifting. The fear that once sat heavy in his chest was no longer running his life. He still remembered what happened that night, but the memory had lost some of its sharpness. Instead of pain, it carried purpose. One evening, he received a call from a local radio host. The woman on the line spoke softly. "We're doing a series on stories of courage," she said. "Your experience has inspired many people. Would you be open to sharing a few thoughts on our show?" At first, he wanted to say no. Talking on the radio felt too big, too exposed. But then he remembered all the people who had reached out, all the quiet voices that had told him, "You gave me hope." He took a breath and said, "Yes, I can do that." The next day, he sat in the small studio. The air smelled like coffee and sound foam. The host sat across from him, warm and welcoming. They spoke about his journey, the fear, the change, and how the community had grown stronger together. He didn't talk about blame or anger. He talked about understanding, respect, and how listening could heal things that punishment never could. After the interview aired, messages began to come in. Some were from people in his city. Others were from far away. "Your story helped me," one message said. "It made me believe again." He realized then that maybe he was part of something larger, something that didn't belong to one person, but to everyone who had ever felt unseen or unheard. As time passed, he stayed involved in the community meetings. They became less about complaints and more about progress. Police officers and residents sat in the same room, talking face to face. There was still tension sometimes, but there was also learning. People were beginning to understand that change didn't mean choosing sides. It meant working together. One afternoon, after a meeting, an older man approached him. His voice was rough but kind. "Son," he said, "I've lived here for 50 years. I've seen a lot. But what you did? It's the first time I've seen people really listen to each other. Don't stop now." He nodded, humbled. "I won't," he said softly. At home, he started keeping a small notebook by his bedside again. But this time, he didn't write about fear or pain. He wrote about moments that made him smile. A neighbor helping another carry groceries, kids playing in the park without worry, officers greeting people by name at the community fair. Little signs that life was getting better. Then one day, something unexpected happened. He received an invitation in the mail. It was from the mayor's office. Inside was a formal letter asking him to attend an upcoming community recognition event. They wanted to honor individuals who had made a positive difference in the city. He stared at the letter for a long time. His first thought was to decline. He didn't want attention, but his brother insisted. "You deserve this," his brother said. "This isn't about fame. It's about showing what can come out of standing up for what's right." So he agreed to go. The evening of the event, the city hall was glowing with soft lights. Families, community leaders, and reporters filled the seats. He sat quietly in the back, not wanting to be noticed. But when his name was called, the whole room turned toward him. He walked to the stage slowly, his hand slightly trembling. The mayor shook his hand and smiled. "This award," the mayor said, "is not just for courage. It's for reminding us what justice and dignity mean in our everyday lives." He accepted the plaque, simple but beautiful, and stood at the microphone. The lights were bright and his heart pounded, but when he spoke, his voice was calm. "I didn't expect to be standing here," he said. "I didn't plan any of this. I just wanted peace, not just for me, but for everyone. What happened to me could happen to anyone. But what matters is what we do after. If we meet anger with understanding, if we meet silence with truth, change can happen. I've seen it." The audience was quiet for a moment, then erupted into warm applause. Later, as he left the building, a young boy ran up to him with his mother. The boy looked up at him with wide eyes. "My mom says you helped make the world a little fairer," the boy said. He smiled and bent down slightly. "Maybe we all did," he replied. "We just have to keep trying." That night, as he walked home, the city felt different. The streets were alive with chatter and laughter. He passed by a mural being painted on a wall, bright colors, words of hope. One part of it said, "Every voice matters." He stood there for a while, watching the artist work, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude. Over the next few weeks, he became more involved in mentorship programs. He began visiting schools, talking to students about respect and courage. He didn't lecture them, he just told stories. About choices, about patience, about the strength it takes to forgive. The kids listened. Some asked questions, some just nodded. One girl raised her hand once and asked, "Were you scared when it happened?" He paused before answering. "Yes," he said honestly. "I was scared. But being scared doesn't make you weak. It just means you're human. What matters is what you do next." After each visit, he would walk home feeling lighter. He was helping others the way he wished someone had helped him long ago. Not with promises, but with understanding. One afternoon, he got another call from the woman at the DA's office. "I wanted to let you know," she said. "The case has officially closed. The department made new policy changes because of it." He sat quietly for a moment. "Policy changes?" "Yes," she said. "More training, more accountability, and a community review board." "It's progress," he smiled. "That's good," he said softly. "That's really good." When he hung up, he looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting gold light over the rooftops. He thought about how far things had come, from fear to fairness, from silence to dialogue. Later that evening, his brother came over with dinner. They ate together, laughing and sharing stories. It felt normal, peaceful. At one point, his brother raised his glass and said, "You know, you turned something painful into something powerful. Not everyone can do that." He smiled quietly. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "A lot of people stood up too." His brother nodded. "Yeah, but someone had to go first." That night, he went to bed feeling a kind of calm he hadn't felt in years. No weight pressing on his chest, no fear creeping in from the dark. Just peace. Over the next few months, he continued his work, speaking, mentoring, and listening. He had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from quiet persistence, from showing up every day and choosing compassion over anger. He saw friendships grow between people who used to avoid each other. He saw officers helping organize food drives and community cleanups. He saw kids playing without fear, neighbors talking, trust slowly rebuilding. One weekend, the community center held a small festival. Music filled the air, children laughed, people danced. The man walked through the crowd, smiling as he saw familiar faces. The woman from the DA's office was there too. When she saw him, she waved and said, "Look around. This is what healing looks like." He nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "It's beautiful." As the sun began to set, he stood near the edge of the park, watching families pack up and lights flicker on. He thought about everything that had happened, how one moment had changed so many lives, how something painful had turned into a reason for people to come together. He pulled out his small notebook again and wrote, "Sometimes change doesn't shout. Sometimes it whispers. It begins in small conversations, in moments of understanding, and then, before you know it, everything looks a little brighter." He closed the notebook, smiled to himself, and walked home under the fading light. That night, he sat on his porch feeling the evening breeze. Somewhere in the distance, he heard laughter, music, and the soft hum of the city moving forward. For the first time in a long while, he realized something simple but powerful. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And even though the world was far from perfect, he knew that as long as people kept listening, kept caring, kept choosing kindness over cruelty, there would always be hope. The next morning began quietly. The man woke up early before the sun had risen. He sat by the window sipping a cup of coffee and watching the light slowly fill the sky. The city outside was still half asleep. Distant car engines, a dog barking, the faint hum of life beginning again. He had learned to love mornings like this. They reminded him that each day was a chance to start fresh, to breathe, to try again. The past was still there, but it no longer ruled him. It had become part of the story he carried, not the weight he bore. He got ready for the day, tying his shoes carefully, just as he always did. He looked around his small but tidy apartment, the neatly stacked books, the photographs on the wall, the little plaque from the mayor's event resting on the shelf. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. Today, he was meeting with a group of young people at the community center again. They were working on a new project, a mentorship program that paired high school students with local role models. He had been helping organize it for weeks, and the first session was finally happening. When he arrived, the center was already buzzing with voices. Teenagers laughed, volunteers set up chairs, and staff moved around with clipboards and coffee cups. It felt alive, hopeful. He walked in quietly, smiling as one of the coordinators waved at him. "You made it," she said cheerfully. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. As the students gathered in a circle, he sat with them. The session began with introductions, each person sharing a little about who they were and what they wanted for their future. Some wanted to be teachers, others dreamed of starting businesses, and a few said they just wanted to make their families proud. When it was his turn, he spoke softly. "I'm just someone who learned that life can surprise you," he said. "Sometimes bad things happen, but if you don't give up, those moments can become your reason to grow." The students listened quietly. One of them raised his hand. "Didn't you go through something tough before?" "My mom told me a little." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I did. But what I learned is that what happens to us doesn't have to decide who we are. What matters is what we do after, how we treat people, how we carry ourselves, how we keep moving forward." There was a silence in the room. Not the awkward kind, but the thoughtful kind. Then another student said, "So, even if people treat you unfairly, you can still make something good out of it." He smiled. "Yes, it's not easy, but it's possible. It starts with choosing not to let hate live in your heart." After the session, a few students stayed behind to talk. One of them told him that his story gave her courage to speak up about something happening at her school. Another said he wanted to help out at the next community event. The man listened, nodded, and felt a quiet pride. These were the moments that mattered most to him, seeing people find their own voices, their own strength. Later that day, as he walked home through the park, he noticed a familiar mural on the wall, the one with the words, "Every voice matters." Now new colors had been added, children's handprints, messages of hope, and small drawings from people in the neighborhood. It was no longer just art. It was a living reminder of what they had built together. He stopped for a while, reading the messages. One small note written in blue paint said, "Thank you for believing in us." He smiled to himself, feeling his heart warm. That evening, he visited his brother. They sat outside on the porch watching the sun go down. His brother grilled dinner while music played softly from a radio nearby. "You've been busy," his brother said with a grin. "Every time I turn on the news, someone's talking about that project you're part of," the man chuckled. "It's not just me. It's all of us. The whole community's been putting in work." "Yeah, but it started with you," his brother said, flipping the food on the grill. "You could have walked away from all this after what happened. But you didn't." He looked out toward the horizon. "I think walking away would have hurt more," he said quietly. "Doing something about it made me feel alive again." They ate together, laughing about old memories, teasing each other like they used to. It felt good. Simple, honest, peaceful. After dinner, his brother asked, "Do you ever think about leaving the city? You know, starting over somewhere new?" He thought about it for a moment. "I used to," he said. "But now? No, this is home. If I left, I'd miss watching things grow." His brother nodded. "Yeah, growth takes time. But you've done something here. People trust each other more now." He smiled softly. "That's all I ever wanted." As weeks turned into months, the mentorship program grew. More volunteers joined. Schools began working with the community center. Even local officers came by sometimes to help with safety workshops and sports events. People who once avoided each other now worked side by side. One afternoon, during one of the sessions, a young boy came running up to him excited. "Guess what?" the boy said. "Our school wrote an essay about community heroes, and I wrote about you." The man laughed. "Me? Why?" "Because you didn't give up," the boy said simply. "And you helped people talk again." He smiled and patted the boy's shoulder. "That means a lot. Thank you." Moments like that reminded him why he kept going. He had learned that healing wasn't just about one person being okay. It was about helping others find peace too. Around that same time, he was invited to speak at a regional conference about social change. The event gathered people from different cities who were working on ways to build stronger, fairer communities. He felt nervous at first. The idea of standing on a big stage with cameras and microphones made his stomach twist. But when he walked out and saw the faces of hundreds of people listening, something inside him calmed. He spoke from the heart just as he always did. "I used to think one voice couldn't change much," he began. "But then I realized change doesn't always happen in big steps. Sometimes it's small, a conversation, a moment of kindness, a decision to stay calm when it's easier to be angry. Those small moments build trust, and trust builds everything else." The room was silent as he spoke, every word landing with quiet meaning. When he finished, people stood and clapped, not wildly, but warmly. After the event, a woman approached him. She worked in another city and said she wanted to start something similar there. "You gave me ideas," she said. "It's good to see that hope still works," he smiled. Hope always works. It just needs people to carry it. Over time, his name became quietly known in community work circles. He didn't chase attention, but people reached out. From schools, from small towns, from local groups, asking for advice. He helped however he could, writing emails, making calls, sharing his story when asked. But through it all, he stayed grounded. He still took the bus to work some days. He still helped his elderly neighbor carry groceries. He still visited his brother for dinner on weekends. One evening, he was invited back to the park for a special ceremony. The community had built a new garden in memory of everyone who had faced hardship, but chose to keep going. It was a small place, benches, flowers, a few trees, but it was beautiful. As people gathered, the mayor spoke briefly about resilience and unity. Then they unveiled a simple stone at the garden's entrance. On it were the words, "Out of struggle comes strength. Out of silence comes change." He stood there for a long time reading those words. The crowd around him slowly thinned, but he stayed until the park grew quiet. Finally, he sat on one of the benches and took a deep breath. The night air was cool, the scent of fresh flowers around him. He thought about everything, the fear, the courage, the unexpected friendships, the lessons. It was strange to think how one moment years ago had led here. A single event, painful and unfair, had somehow opened a door to healing for so many people. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his old notebook. The cover was worn, the pages nearly filled. On the last page he wrote, "I used to think strength was about fighting. Now I know it's about forgiving. I used to think justice was about punishment. Now I see it's about growth. The world isn't perfect, but it's worth trying for. Always. He closed the notebook and placed it gently on the bench beside him for a moment, as if leaving behind a piece of his journey. The next day, life went on as usual: work, laughter, community meetings. But now there was peace in the rhythm. Sometimes people would still recognize him on the street. They'd thank him, shake his hand, or just smile. He'd always smile back and say something simple: "Keep believing. It matters." Years later, the garden remained a place people visited often. Children played there. Couples walked hand in hand, elders sat quietly in the shade. And on warm evenings, the sound of laughter filled the air. Soft, healing, alive. Every once in a while, someone new would hear the story about the man who had once faced injustice and turned it into understanding. They'd ask what was his secret, and those who knew would answer, he never stopped believing that people could change. The truth was simple. He had never set out to be a symbol, never aimed to change the world. All he had wanted was to be treated with respect. And through that wish, he had reminded everyone else what respect truly meant. Life had gone full circle. On a quiet afternoon years later, he sat once again by his window with a cup of coffee. The city had grown, new buildings, new faces, new sounds. But the same soft morning light still spilled across the floor. He smiled as he watched it, feeling grateful for every lesson, every scar, every act of kindness.